you painted a pretty bleak picture, I have to say, about labour, access to labour in the coming years. It's quite a controversial question here. Should employers of immigrant labour contribute more money towards the strain on local schools and health clinics?
I think with future schemes, there may, with future seasonal worker schemes and with future sector-based schemes, they may come with provisions. Now, I think operating a scheme like that will be overly complex and impossible to enforce, so I don't think that will be the model. But I think there will be a requirement, if you are going to use a sector-based scheme or a seasonal workers scheme, to be offering, to ensure that you are offering opportunities to local workers, and maybe going beyond to offer opportunities to those individuals who are maybe harder to reach, longer-term unemployed individuals, perhaps with disabilities and the like. And I think with sector-based skills schemes, I think we'll be looking, if there is an occupational skills shortage, then I think there'll be a requirement to demonstrate that if you have a short-term need, that may be able to be filled through a guest worker scheme or a short-term scheme which doesn't impact on net migration figures, but you'll be required to demonstrate that you are using your apprenticeship levy to address those skill shortages in the medium to longer term.
Well, added to that, someone else has asked, Cedric Porter asked this, could Brexit eventually mean a much larger pool of global rather than EU labour? And quite a few farmers I've spoken to over the past year, one of them in particular said to me he'd love to go back to the days when he could have workers from all over the world coming onto his farm.
Yes. It will do. I think a seasonal workers scheme. There are many countries throughout Europe that step outside of the EU to source their seasonal workers. Where we will eventually end up doing that is still to be discussed and negotiated. One of the things that growers do say is that if we are to introduce a scheme, it's helpful to them to be able to access those individuals year after year. So some arrangements that have happened previously with colleges, with agricultural colleges in other countries, may not be the right solution, because you get them for a year, maybe 2 years, but you're having to retrain that workforce every year. So there are a downside to that model. But yeah, I think in terms of seasonal workers, if we are wanting to be able to source a workforce, then we're going to have to step outside of the EU.
Okay. Yeah, do.
It was interesting to me. I was giving evidence to the International Trade Committee a few months ago on a potentially US-UK, I wouldn't call it deal, but deepening trade links. And we sort of got onto the discussion about what was needed to make Global Britain more than just a slogan. And it really rested on making sure that, despite Brexit, the UK still remained a home for, I was asked the question about talent, and I said there's differing ways to measure talent, and I don't think the Home Office definition is particularly useful in terms of the salary criteria. But someone asked me the question, when I made that point, we can't replace EU free movement with Indian free movement. And that was striking to me on a number of different levels. Firstly, there are lots of different ways to encourage and increase labor mobility that aren't just free movement. And I think one of the consequences of free movement has been that is when people start talking about labor mobility, that is how people understand it in that context. It's total, absolute free movement of labor. But secondly, that really to buy into this idea of what, particularly I think for a services-reliant economy, the importance of talking about movement of different types of skills and talent to sort of plug skill shortages, despite that, I don't think that we're going to, in the short term, get under the current Prime Minister, a sort of system that suddenly matches EU preferences on labour mobility with the rest of the world. The Prime Minister was the Home Secretary. The net migration target is something that she fought for and has maintained very strongly. So I don't see that happening anytime soon. Having said that, one of the arguments during the referendum was, well, it's discriminatory free movement. I could understand at a very base level the case for that. Having said that, there are preferential systems for movement of talent, labor, people all over the world, not just in the EU. The Common Travel Area, before they joined the EU, the Nordics had something akin to free movement. So they may seem discriminatory, but EU freedom of movement, or rather having a preferential system for labour mobility on a regional basis, is not something that is unique to the UK and the EU. And
it's more complex.
It's much more complex than that, and I think that we have to anticipate that, and it's something that I think that the UK has to offer in the negotiations, is access for people who do want to move to the UK for a variety of different employment, living standards reasons. We will have to look at a preferential system, even if it's not free movement as it currently exists.
That little ripple of laughter wasn't at you, because someone has now asked, we've got 80,000 people in prison in the UK. Could they pick fruit and harvest vegetables?
I've got an even better solution than
better
that.
Solution.
There's about, there are many hundreds of thousands of people in the UK who've entered illegally, who are working illegally, with no plan to regularise them into our economy. A political outlook on it that says, let's not talk about it, let's not do anything about it, let's not research it, let's not face it. I think we could solve quite a few of our issues if we were to take a grown-up look at addressing that issue.
Very, very politically.
Yeah, I haven't got any
hot
politicians
issue,
to kind of go down
Yeah.
that one yet, but there we go.
Well, that sort of sums up the questions that we've got at the moment. I just wanted to sort of round up what we've heard today. I mean, it has been a very, very wide-ranging discussion. And thank you all for taking part as well, asking your questions, which I think has worked pretty well, especially as you can ask things anonymously without having to stand up and show your face. So well done for taking part, and thank you very much for joining in. So what have we heard today? A great deal of concern, I think, on every single basis. Concern about trade deals, concern about tariffs, about farm subsidies, about productivity, about labour supply, and about funding for agri-science as well. But we've also heard about opportunities for trade with other countries outside the EU, opportunities for support for farmers in different ways, maybe, than they're supported at the moment, raising self-sufficiency, making sure that farming gets up off its knees, starts working harder, providing more food for people, and a commitment, maybe, to keeping seasonal workers as well. So the real work, actually, even though we keep saying the government's doing nothing, we haven't heard very much from the government, the real work, though, comes from you. And as we said earlier in the day, speaking with one voice and making sure that when deals are done, that they don't put you at a disadvantage. So you've still got work to do, the government's still got work to do, but thank you for coming today and for joining in the sessions.